I have this friend. We've been friends for like a long time, like 12, 13 years. And he's he's a Christian. And I've always kept my religious beliefs kind of separate from his. Well, I mean, I didn't advertise them, so to speak. I kind of called myself an atheist. And he's a really intelligent guy, except when it comes to his moral security and his faith, right? I mean, I would ask him simple questions like, okay, so according to the Bible, the world is what, about 6,000 years old, roughly? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, how do you explain carbon dating? How do you explain this science? How do you explain fossils? I mean, we know that the world is like 6 billion years old, so you're not even in the fucking ballpark. He's like, no, it's about 6,000 years. You can trace it from the Bible, from Adam and Eve and their descendants all the way up. I'm like, really? Really, man? Do you really believe that? He's like, of course I do. I'm like, well, how do you explain dinosaur bones? He's like, oh, well, there's no proof dinosaurs existed. There's like little pieces of bones, and then they remodel these entire dinosaurs. I'm like, dude, are you serious? Where the fuck have you been? No, they're real dinosaurs, right? Certainly some are missing bones here and there, but we know they existed. And we know that they're fucking millions of years old. He's like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, there's a couple ways. One, we have carbon dating. He's like, that's not an exact science. I'm like, well, I know it's not an exact science, but it's fairly accurate, I can give you a ballpark figure of how old something is. He's like, no, that's never been proven. I was like, okay, well, we know by the sedimentary layers in the earth. Okay, we know, like the rings of a tree, you can count them. And we know how far down that goes. He's like, that's not exact science. I'm like, dude, and this guy, he's a network administrator, so he's technical, right? You would think he would come up with a better argument than this. And then finally he's like, well, I think that maybe Jesus or God, put these things here to test our faith. I'm like, are you serious? And then then there's other people that have this argument that, oh, well, some stories in the Bible are not to be taken literally. They're more, it's like the moral of the story. They're not to be taken literally. And it's like, well, not according to the Bible. The Bible is the Word of God, and all of it should be taken literally. Then again, it's like, well, okay, well, so what? You're going to pick and choose what you believe? So what are the 10 Commandments now not supposed to be taken literal? Is Jesus' death and resurrection not to be taken literal? Oh, but because science can disprove a lot of stories and myths in the Bible, those ones are now fables, right? The Bible's foolish, and the whole thing, Noah's Ark, that's another good one, right? Noah's Ark, right? You fit 2 of every animal on an ark, right? Well, one, we know that 2 of every animal, even if you had an ark that could fit 2 of every animal, right? That is not enough to propagate the species, right? It would all die out because it would just be an incestuous herd of mammals and animals. Not to mention there's no fucking way you could fit 2 of every goddamn animal on anything. Okay, so we can disprove that right away. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to see intelligent people still hanging on to myths because they were so ingrained to them as children that they just refuse, and they refuse to see the logic behind it, or the lack of logic, therefore, and they hide their heads in the sand like an ostrich when they're approached with rationality and reason. This is why I don't argue with creationalists. That's why. Because you can't win. You can't argue logic and reason against faith. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not worth it. You're wasting your breath. These people will never, ever be able to look at something objectively that challenges their faith in God.